As strong and enduring as the Rocky Mountains they stood beside, as visionary as the views of the Grand Plains they looked across. The women inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame are trailblazers whose work has improved and enriched our lives. They are teachers, scientists, ranchers, leaders in business, education, religion, and the arts. Women who have been recognized for their many contributions to our state, our country, and the world. I'm Renelda Muse, and these are the stories of great Colorado women. Marion Downs was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame for her pioneering work in medicine and healthcare. As an audiologist, she believed that the earlier hearing problems were detected in babies, the sooner treatment could begin. Working in the classroom and the lab at both the University of Denver and at the University of Colorado, she pioneered fitting infants with hearing aids. That set the stage for future breakthroughs in the field of audiology. While the majority of her accomplishments came in Colorado, her story began in Minnesota.
She had grown up in Minnesota in a little town called New Ulm, which had been founded by her grandfather, my great-grandfather. And he had started an organization of like-minded individuals, and it was almost like church and a gymnasium together.
Well, my childhood, oddly enough, was focused on gymnastics because I came from a group called the Turnverein, which was a little German group in Minnesota. And our aims were a sound mind and a sound body.
And she was brought up that way. She did exercise every single day. She ate well. She read everything she could read to make her mind fertile.
Her father was a lawyer. Her father was very political. Marion was very smart and a very good writer, and so she was encouraged to go into law. And she actually started off as a pre-law student at the University of Minnesota. Marion married George Downs shortly after she graduated from college in Minnesota.
I married young, obviously, and I was a little bit of innocent, and I learned so much from him. He was a PhD geologist.
George was a pioneer geologist who helped map much of the West. So they actually started close to Glacier Park and moved down to Wyoming for a while.
They lived in this log cabin without running water and electricity, and she had to learn how to use a shotgun to chase away the mountain men.
We had traveled for 15 years around Montana and Wyoming searching for oil, the usual thing, and we finally landed in Denver, where I said, this is where we're going to stay.
She always said that Colorado felt more like home to her than anywhere else she lived.
There's something about the Rocky Mountain West that allowed Marion to be kind of a maverick and be very creative.
And there was no question that she identified with the spirit of Colorado as matching her spirit.
I think that was something that she monopolized on while she was here.
Marion's story was she knew she wanted to help people, and she knew she wanted to get more education.
But I didn't quite know what I wanted to take up. So I went over here to DU to the registration, and it was right after World War II. And every GI in the world was there registering, it seemed to me, and every line was at least a mile long.
So she looked around the auditorium, and she saw a short line, and she went for it.
And the line in the speech and hearing was the shortest.
I didn't have time to wait in the line like that. And although I'd never even heard of audiology, it was a short line and I would get out very quickly, so I registered for it.
She made the most of that experience and just gave her all, and it was just the perfect match.
Nothing noble, I'm sorry, just the shortest line. And I fell in love with it, and I've loved being an audiologist ever since.
And while Marion did have her share of adult patients, she was very passionate about early intervention, early support for people with hearing loss. And she quickly created processes and new ideas and supports that made the practice of audiology have a subspecialty for kids with hearing loss. And really, up to that point, no one had thought of it as a subspecialty.
What I am glad about is that I did have my children first, and then went back to school, and then had a career.
Marion always would say, my first role is as a matriarch and a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. She relished in that role. It was her pride and joy in life. And by already being a mother and already having very strong family values for supporting families and children, she brought that sensitivity to the needs of children and families, and recognized that when children came to her, they very often came because they weren't learning to talk.
By 18 months, a baby has learned 80% of all of its language that it will ever have. Has language. Now, I'm not talking about vocabulary, I'm talking about language. Even the professional community had no idea how important it was to start babies at birth with speech and language and auditory stimulation.
Marion believed that you could do this far before there was any technology that would allow us to do that.
Some of the early techniques Marion used had to do with very loud horns and then measuring a child's movement during loud noise stimulation. Luckily, by the mid-1970s, electronic testing done with electrodes and testing brainwave patterns were available. And at that point, we could have a more objective way to test hearing.
Marion made such a difference in our family.
When I came here in 1975, not only did I meet Marion Downs, but I met LaFawn very, very early on. LaFawn is a tremendous woman in her own right, and in those days there were almost no services for deaf children. Marion had identified both of her children, and I met them shortly after I arrived in Colorado.
When Belinda was about 3.5, the little girl next door clued us to the fact that she had to be looking at us to understand us. Well, I didn't know that because I had been calling her from the sandbox. If she didn't respond, I would hit the door, the metal door with a paddle, and oh, she would smile and come running. And what I thought was, she knows I mean business when I do this. Instead, she heard me.
I was one of Marion Downs' first clients. She diagnosed me around 4 years of age with a hearing loss. And it's because of her I got my hearing aid, and I could hear people and wasn't as frustrated not feeling misheard or misunderstood.
All the research that's come out has shown that babies who are found at birth with hearing loss are able to get to school age, able to compete with their hearing peers in regular school.
I was mainstreamed and had speech therapy while I was in the regular schools.
When Belinda was 5, her sister was born, and Barbara, before she was a year old, was identified. My husband said one morning, "You know, I don't think Barbara can hear either." I said, "Of course she can hear. Don't let me hear you say that again." I began to test her when she wasn't looking at me. Sure enough, she didn't respond unless she was looking at me. So we had her tested. Marion took care of that as an infant before she was a year old. And she was fitted with hearing aids quite early. Her brain developed well too. And they are both outstanding women now because of the work that we got from Marion.
Marion
touch our lives. She has time for everyone.
The success of the Biddle daughters, how successful they were educationally, helped Marion feel confident that pushing for services like the Biddle family chose to pursue was the right choice.
It just would hit you in the face that the younger you could get these kids, put hearing aids on them, the better was their ultimate speech and language.
And having a parent advocate, having a partner that could help convince people it was the right thing to do, I think changed the way Marion practiced. To this day, we have a partnership with parents at the Marion Downs Center based on that early partnership that LaFawn and Marion had together to try and improve services for kids with hearing loss.
Marion was always out in the forefront, always a leader, and always a strong advocate for children with hearing loss.
Her professional partner, Dr. Jerry Northern, she credited for a lot of her opportunity in life. They wrote many articles together. They have a very prolific textbook, still used today, for pediatric audiology. And she credited Jerry for pushing her and giving her the opportunity to become an author and an international speaker.
There was no book on hearing in children at that time in the 70s. Marion said she'd be delighted. She'd be happy to work with me, and we set out an outline that the book would cover. But we were so busy in our clinic and so busy in our lives that we kind of never got around to really writing it. I was contacted by the book publisher probably 8 months later, a year later, asking how we were doing. I have to say I assured him we were doing very nicely. It was coming along just great, and the final version would be available soon, knowing full well that we had not written a single page about it at all. And we worked very diligently, and lo and behold, within 6 months, we had actually written the entire first edition of the Hearing in Children book. And it turned out to be a very successful book, and that also helped propel her to be such a strong international figure.
Marion Downs is very well known nationally and internationally. There probably isn't a hearing health professional that practices today that doesn't know of her work and been inspired by her research and her ideas.
You know, we know her from the work that she did in the field of audiology, but Marion actually has been an activist all of her life.
I think Marion recognized early on in her training and her career that there were very few women of her generation that were successful and encouraged to both have a career and be doing a good job supporting family and traditional values.
Oh, well, at that time, remember, that was still before women's rights came in. I felt, you know, women at that time had to do better than men. They had to work harder than men to show that they really could accomplish what men could.
But her real accomplishment and showing what a professional she was, to me, was observing her working in the medical school. Understanding that she had a master's degree, she worked in a medical school in a department of surgery, which was totally run by very strong, domineering men.
And as a matter of fact, one of the PhD audiologists told me, he said, "Don't get a PhD. A woman shouldn't have a PhD in this field. They wouldn't be able to do the research that men will do."
Our major professional organization was the American Speech, Hearing, and Language Association, which had a huge membership and an annual convention. At a point in Marion's life, they finally decided that they would anoint Marion with the honors of this group. So she was notified that she was to receive the honors. The next convention was scheduled for Atlanta, Georgia. But it turned out that Georgia was one of the very last states to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. So Marion stood her ground and said because of that, she would give up the honors unless they wanted to move the convention.
Back in the 70s, there was a Continental airline crash, and Marion was on her way to an American Speech and Hearing Association meeting to present a keynote address.
She got on a Continental airline flight, which took off from Stapleton, got to a height of 600, 800 feet. The plane caught on fire and ultimately crashed in a field not far from the airport.
They had to go out on shoots and there was a fire in the cabin.
She claims that she was one of the very first people down the slide and out the door.
She tells this story about how she got a little bit worried when she saw the pilot running past her when she was running, off the field.
Well, she came back to work later that day. She took the afternoon to get her hair redone.
And Marion's only thought is how could she get as fast as possible on the next flight so she wouldn't miss her keynote address.
She gets on the phone to make another reservation because she wants to make it to the conference on time.
And when I asked her about, wasn't she frightened at all about the airplane flight again, she said, oh no, Continental Airlines has had their crash for this month, so I'm sure that I'll be very safe. And off she went.
She was a remarkable woman. She also had a very close call when she was in Vietnam at a conference.
In the 1970s, during the time of some conflict, she was there to train them on how to test kids' hearing.
She was going to be picked up by a driver, and they came to the hotel to pick her up, and for whatever reason she didn't get into this Jeep, and the Jeep took off down the road and a couple of blocks later exploded.
That didn't put her on a plane back to the US. She felt she still had to finish her course. She went out there and taught them without the use of her equipment.
Well, very early on, I decided that we must try to test babies at birth. And the first accomplishment was really setting up a newborn hearing screening program here in Denver. But all we had at that time was just electronically devised signals. And we tested the newborn babies there. And the Junior League was wonderful. The Junior League offered to learn how to do the testing. And in almost every hospital in Denver, we were testing babies.
So when you think about this infant screening, she began that project in 1973 by convincing the Junior League ladies of Denver to test every baby born in the city of Denver for a solid year. So they tested 17,000 babies. They found 17 profoundly deaf babies in that group. She published a paper on that, and that really started her whole career. But screening hearing in infants was not welcomed by many groups, including pediatricians, otolaryngologists, and in fact, other audiologists.
I was very lucky that around the 1980s to 90, neurologists finally came out with the theory that has been proved, of course, that it's very important to get auditory stimulation into the newborn baby, because if you don't, the neurons in the auditory cortex will die off.
I'm sure she did not realize it was going to take her the majority of her life to see it finally reach full fruition until 1993, when it finally really boiled over and came to the attention of the National Institutes of Health, who decided to suggest that all states pick up a universal hearing screening and that all babies should be tested. Well, that idea by that time caught on quite rapidly. So by the time of her passing, 97% of all babies born in the United States actually received a hearing screening test before they were discharged from the hospital.
Marion really was the reason. She was one of the few people in her generation who believed that, first of all, that we could identify hearing loss in newborns, and she was the lone voice of her generation who was the constant promoter of services to mothers and very young children.
Having that passion and that value before it was proven with research really helped change the direction of our profession and the direction of the goals of research at that time, and trying to prove that this was a good idea.
I think Marion was such a strong influence on us all and a mentor to so many people that the idea of continuing her name forever by attaching it to a center would be a good remembrance of her.
The Marion Downs Center really evolved from ideas that we had as we were providing services for our community of people with hearing loss primarily, and recognized that there were a lot of work to be done.
The first Marion Downs Center actually started because We received a grant to assist states in developing state systems for implementation of universal newborn hearing screening. And when we were awarded the grant, we called Marion to tell her that we had gotten the grant, and we said we were going to name the center the Marion Downs Center. And then she started crying, and we had never seen her cry, but she was so touched by the fact that this would be her legacy, that and that she had lived long enough to see it happen.
You know, Marion wrote a book. Her book is called Shut Up and Live. And when I asked her to explain what that meant, she said, well, people shouldn't piddle around with excuses. Just shut up, don't think about the excuses, and move on with making the most of your life. And that clearly was who she was.
I had read all of these 50 and 60-year-olds who told us how to live so well into the 90s and 100s, you know. And I said, they have no idea what it takes to live into the 90s and 100. It isn't easy. Remember Betty Davis said, old age ain't for sissies, and believe me, it ain't. I felt I had to tell people what they were going to go through and how to deal with it.
When we wanted to have a 95th birthday party for her and asked what the theme should be, she said, well, of course it should be exercise.
She was a jogger, she was a swimmer, she was a skier, she played tennis every Saturday morning, just anything that could take her outside.
And she was fierce about exercise. She was even fiercer about staying completely up on things.
And that's really what she wanted people to know, I think, most about her, is the energy, the resilience, and the thought that you should always be looking ahead, make the most of your life no matter what comes your way, and you will have an impact on others.
I wouldn't live that life over again for anything. I just love it where I am. Being this age is really a great pleasure, believe me.
Marion was a very vibrant, enthusiastic, almost unstoppable kind of personality.
She was just the most colorful, charismatic person you would ever want to meet.
She also always said, you want to plan your life to live to be 100.
Live every minute of life and enjoy it.
She really showed me what one person with tenacity could really do with an idea.
One thing I've learned in life is to be patient, but to keep working.
You know, I hope her greatest legacy is that we continue not only the work that she inspired, but that we look past what we thought needed to be done in past years and look forward to things that need to be done in the future.
Her dream was to provide services for ear and hearing problems for people of all ages. That wish came true in May 2005 with the opening of the Marion Downs Hearing Center on the Anschutz Medical Campus. Marion Downs was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame in 2006. She passed away in 2014 at the age of 100.